Hello, Brad here, just to say we're super proud that the Friday 5pm podcast is sponsored by the Malt Miller, the UK's best home brew store.
We use the Malt Miller for all of our homebrew experiments, as well as tapping them up for advice and binging on their awesome YouTube channel all the time.
That's why whenever we release a homebrew video, we put a recipe kit live on the Malt Miller, so you can brew with the exact same amazing ingredients that we did. The same ingredients used by pro brewers.
So alongside the Malt Miller's nitro-flushed hops, cold-stored yeast and milled-to-order malts, you can pick up recipe kits for our 5 Points Best Bitter, Russian River West Coast IPA, and now the fastest beer in the world, a hazy session IPA that goes from grain to glass in less than 48 hours.
Sign up to their newsletter at tinyurl.com/Malt Miller to get 5% off your first order. With the Malt Miller's amazing customer service and Johnny's 48-hour recipe, you could order the ingredients on a Monday and be drinking the beer by the weekend.
Speaking of which, it's Friday.
It's 5pm.
So enjoy this week's Friday 5pm podcast.
Hello and welcome back to The Bubble for another exciting episode full of mystery in Dungeons and Dragons. We have got the very, very funny Rufus Hound joining us this week. He's a bit of a Tory, isn't he, Johnny? We got that impression?
Yeah, maybe. He gets very political towards the end. He's very much not a Tory. But we invited him on. I've been a huge fan of Rufus Hound for a long time. I think he's actually hysterical, and I loved his very... he sort of got famous for doing incredibly honest and open and sort of acerbic interviews, which I used to love watching, and you can still see a few of them on YouTube. I might link to a few. And I always thought he was brilliant. And he started following the Craft Beer channel on Twitter a couple of months ago, and I just sort of clocked that and was like, "Oh, that could be an interesting Bubble episode." And then I was watching Would I Lie to You late night, and a couple of weeks ago, and he was on there, and he told a story where you're supposed to guess whether it's a lie or whether it's true, about him visiting all but 4 of London's Red Lion pubs. And I immediately said, yeah, that's true, because I knew he liked beer. And it was true. And so I decided then and there that we needed to get Rufus on to hear that story.
Because you told me about the sort of the Red Lion thing, and I was like, that is so cool. Like, definite Bubble episode. There's so many Red Lions, and I just want to hear him talking about going to that many pubs potentially in one sitting. But we kind of quickly realised that we segue quite heavily towards his love affair with a game that I'm actually not that familiar with, Dungeons and Dragons. So just before we recorded it, Johnny and I were having a chat about it, and I gave him sort of an insight into my ignorance and said, I really don't know much about this game. And he says, I think everyone knows about it, but maybe we hang about different
how nerdy my friendship group is, basically what happened there. So for those of you who don't know, because most of this episode is a talk about Dungeons and Dragons and a talk about how it's really been helping Rufus, both sort of with escapism in lockdown, but also with some struggles that he's having in his life more generally. And it gets very emotional at several points. So if you're affected by any of the issues that he talks about, we'll put some links in the description box below where you can find help. And if you want to reach out, we say so on the Craft Beer channel all the time. Brad and my DMs are always open for you to come and chat about stuff, and we have had people do that in the past. Particularly working in alcohol, these issues can get on top of you. To help you understand that, you need to know what Dungeons and Dragons is. And what it is a role-playing game, role-playing dice-based game in which the players take on a character. And these games go on for months and years even. And you build these characters around you, and the dungeon master, who's sort of like the quiz master, will have a plot that he or she is building through and twisting as the characters make decisions in this game, as the dice is rolled, depending on whether they're successful in certain challenges. And you can go as deep into the role play as you kind of want. And I've never played this game, but I've watched many things that reference it, including an amazing episode of Community, which is a great sitcom if you haven't seen it. So if you really want to understand what this is before you listen to the podcast, go to season 2, episode 14, of Community. It's called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and it is a truly brilliant episode that kind of explains how what is just like 4, 5, 6 friends in a room really does quite magically become an incredible adventure that has completely sucked Rufus in. I can almost hear Rob's cynicism over the line here. Just silence as I waffle on.
I would say before I spoke to Rufus, yes, cynicism levels were high, but it was great to see him talk so passionately about it, and he's obviously got so much from it in a very difficult time of his life. So it was actually really refreshing to hear someone talk like that. Yeah, and we didn't really talk about the Red Lion too much. We nearly should get him on for a second episode to hear about those adventures.
I feel like he can't remember a lot of it because I think he was quite a lot younger when he did it, and I think they really did get very drunk for most of them.
Yeah.
So maybe what we need to do is another episode where we go with Rufus again and we try and get some more cultural knowledge and context out of it. Whereas I think he was just going around getting really drunk in the UK's like most common pub name, which is still a very legitimate way to spend a couple of days.
If you're going to pick a name of a pub to get drunk in, Red Lion's a good choice. So
absolutely.
Well, without further ado, let's go over to Rufus. And if you don't like the C-bomb being used a lot, maybe don't tune in towards the end. So here we go.
Let's talk about beer, Johnny. Let's talk about AVB. Let's talk about Imperial Stouts and imbibes of wicked weed. Let's talk about beer. Let's talk about beer. Let's talk about beer. Let's talk about beer.
So, Rufus, thank you so much for joining us. I gather you're late because you were skating.
That's right. I mean, since my very first television appearances, people have been asking me when would they get to see me ice skate, and it just felt like now was the time to finally bring the nation's dreams to reality.
That's how you're justifying an appearance on reality TV?
It's that, or just outwardly telling people I'm clearly only doing it for the money.
How are your ice skating skills? Are you a seasoned pro? Did you play a bit of hockey back in the day?
No. My ice skating skills are very much, I think, like most people's, if they can claim to have any at all, which is at about 14, it seemed like somewhere you could go to meet girls or hang out with girls or have a reason to touch girls, variously them helping you up or you helping them up. And then when I realised that was not really working, immediately stopped ever going anywhere near ice skating.
That was actually a similar situation to me. It must be the world over.
I would imagine so. I can't think there are that many human beings who look at ice skating and objectively go, "Oh yeah, I want in on that," right? I mean, there's got to be something else governing it.
Well, you're going to change a lot of minds, I'd imagine, after your performance. There'll be so many young teens at home thinking, "I want to be like that guy."
That's it. I think if there's one thing I'm renowned for, it's my ability to inspire teenagers to action. But that is largely getting up and turning the telly off, or just asking their mum and dad to turn over Radio 4.
Cool, right. Well, usually the people that we invite on this know nothing about beer, but I gather you're a bit of a beer geek yourself, and you've brought some tasty beers for the recording.
Well, I will not lay claim to have heard your undoubtedly magnificent podcast previously, but when we were setting this up over Twitter, you did offer to send me some beer. And then it became clear that maybe the gist of this was that while we were having this conversation, beer was consumed. And I'm incredibly fortunate in that I live only round the corner, really, from a place called Noble Green, which I understand, Rob, you have some experience of.
Yes, they're a customer of mine. I've dealt with Michael and Peter for a very, very long time. They're both great. They've bought beer off us at Give Direct for longer than I've been at the company, which is like 6 years. So they're long-standing. I would say they made craft beer cool in the Southwest.
Is it cool now?
It's wait, calm down, Jonathan, calm down. Put the leather jacket away. It's transitional cool, isn't it? It's cool to the people that it's cool for, but ultimately what we are struggling to accept is that we are getting older, so in our heads it's cool because it's not what the old fat beardy grey men were drinking, but then you realise, oh, we are them now. So it is. It
Like
is.
your dad drinks suddenly all over again.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
know to sort of label craft beer drinkers as like, these really young, cool hipsters. And then if you go to a craft beer festival and it's basically a bunch of beardy men who got a slight gut.
Yeah. Yes, welcome. That is almost literally, except in beanies and with either currently elaborate moustaches or previously elaborate moustaches, depending on where on the curve they sit. So yeah, no, I've lived in the same town as Noble Green for about 10 years, and I can't. I guess I would struggle to nail when craft beer became a kind of thing I realised was happening. I spent a lot of my 20s in Putney. I had a mate who lived in Putney, and he let me sleep in his spare room. And so Putney is like one of the real epicentres for Young's as a brewery. So almost all of the pubs in Putney are Young's pubs. And if you're in a Young's pub, drinking, fizzy lager isn't necessarily the go. So I've just drunk a lot of Young's Ordinary, and they get very angry if you call it Ordinary. But they had two beers. One was just called Young's Bitter, and the other was Special. It was literally called Special. So if you went to the bar and said, "Can I have a pint of Young's?" the bar staff would always try and clarify, "Do you mean special?" At which point, how do you differentiate from a special? If something isn't special, it is, drum roll please, ordinary. so
that or not special, which is also not particularly great.
Yeah,
nothing special.
Yeah. Oh, give me a lovely pint of mediocre. So yeah, I drank a lot of ordinary, and then I guess, yeah, at some stage started to realise that bitter was trying to kind of reinvent itself as being a bit cooler. And yeah, I think my go-to originally would have been Beavertown before it was everywhere. Obviously everyone loves Gamma Ray. And then now Neck Oil has sort of taken over from Gamma Ray as being the kind of average Beavertown beer.
It's a little bit
The ordinary Beavertown,
cheaper, so people like it a bit more.
That's right, and it's less ABV as well, so you can drink more of them without feeling smashed. But my favourite Beavertown beer is their seasonal Blood Orange IPA, which I think is called Bloody Hell. And I didn't realise that was 7% when I first drank it. So I was leaving a job that I'd done up near King's Cross, and there's a craft beer shop between where I was working and where the bus stop was. And I slid in there. It was a lovely sunny day. I'd finished my work. I thought, oh, this will be nice. I'll just get a couple of cold ones for the way home, and hadn't really eaten. And cracked open a can of that just while waiting for the bus and absolutely sculled it. Like it was one of those beers I drank because I was thirsty rather than beers I was drinking because I was wondering how the hops, aligned with blah, blah, blah. Just absolutely smashed it. And by the time the bus turned up, I was swimming. There was music playing in my head. Everything had got a kind of rainbow haze to it. And
air drumming in your seat, like I always do when I'm drunken. Yeah.
Well, it was literally before the bus turned up, so I'd cracked the first one, smashed it, thrown the can in the bin, then gone for the second one, opened that, and was already drinking it, thinking, this will be all right, because it's basically only really a pint, isn't it? Two of those cans, it's only just over a pint, really.
7% beer, yeah.
Yeah, but I hadn't realised it was 7%, that was it. So I smashed the first one, thinking, well, I'll go easy on the second one, forgetting, of course, that you're not allowed to drink beer on London public transport. So then felt like I was swimming, realised how strong it was as the bus was pulling up, and had to smash the second one. Which meant that the bus journey back to Waterloo was pretty groovy, but also meant, of course, as even a whiff of beer seems to mean, a combination of a whiff of beer and getting on a train means that within 2 stops, I am crippled for a piss. Just unable to do anything other than try not to explode with urine. I don't know whether that's because I'm getting older or some genetic disposition, but yeah.
I think it's psychology. I think just as soon as you're in an enclosed space, like if you ever feel sick and you get into a lift, you're just like, I mean, obviously it's going to happen now. Isn't it?
I don't know if that happens for me, actually.
Oh,
Maybe it's horses for courses.
Liquid lips, Johnny.
some kind of nauseous claustrophobia that I.
Yeah, so I think Beavertown was where it started for me, and then I think shortly after that, realising that Noble Green was round the corner. Now, as I say, realising this podcast, there was maybe some onus on enjoying a few while it was recording. I just slid round there now and picked up a bunch of things I have not drunk before. So this is not me going through my desert island beers. This is
Don't check the ABV either, Rufus. We want...
but I also took a couple of photographs, which I will send you, so that if you want to tweet them or whatever as well, people can see how great Noble Green is. If you like craft beer, just hold the phone, because I have worked all over the country and lived all over the country for weeks at a time on tours and what have you. I have looked for posh beer shops in 1,000 places, and there is not one that even comes close to as knowledgeable, the breadth of selection, like how seriously they take it, and how decent and kind and funny they are when you're in there. So I just can't say enough good things about them. They're doing online, they're doing all of that. If you're anywhere near southwest London, use Noble Green. They are the absolute bomb. So, shall I now just cut to the most exciting bit? All of that, by the way, also makes it sound like they've given me some kind of discount, right? Because, like, I've done a big sales pitch for them.
I'm going to cut that out, put that in the middle of every podcast we do, and then start charging the shop a fee, going, Rufus's advert was on last night, so...
Stupidly, no discount at all. I mean, I get regular user points, but it's just that I'm a fan of... I am a big fan of independent shops specifically, but independent shops that do what they do really well. Sorry?
And booze.
And booze. Yeah. Well, that was going to be my third one. If you're a barber and I walk in and the first thing you do is ask me if I want a beer, then you're my favourite barber. But that also works with, nurseries, childcare, vets. So let's see what I got. I got a London Beer Factory Big Milk Stout, it's called. It is a 7.5% vanilla and cacao nib imperial stout. I like London Beer Factory beers.
They've got a funny ring pull, don't they?
Because of the can, is exactly what I was about to say. It is a ring pull that when you pull it, the entire top of the can comes off. And if you drink beer like I drink beer, which is by pouring it directly into the stomach as quickly as possible, then that is a revelation.
I think on a train, though, I've discovered, because it's more like a cup vessel.
Yeah.
So the shaky train does make a bit of a mess with it.
Yeah. But again, that's because you're hanging around drinking it. Get it drunk, son. Yeah. So that was the first one. This one is called Post Run Sultana Pale Ale. Apparently Sultana is a new type of hop. I've not, to my knowledge, had a beer with that in it.
That's just misleading if it doesn't taste of Sultana.
You would think, right? It's
Santana.
No, Sultana.
Sultana, the raisin.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sultana Pale Ale. This is made by Mad Squirrel. Where are they from?
Called Red Squirrel, and then they thought red isn't crazy enough. Let's
Not
make
craft enough, so they went mad.
Yeah, that sounds about right, doesn't it? No information about them or anything.
But Albansy, I think.
Was it?
Yeah.
Hang on. At the bottom, it's Potton End, Hertfordshire. According to this, it says on it's suitable for vegans, which is something we might get onto. This I've had several times, and I just bloody love it. Juice Springsteen.
Good name as well. We used to share a warehouse with them, I believe, in Manchester, didn't we, Johnny?
Oh yeah, you did. Yeah, Will used to. Came direct north.
Yeah. Guys.
So I got a few of those. This is Nipa Vocation. This was the most expensive one that I bought.
From South London.
Yeah.
Mondo, yeah.
They've got really good recently. I hadn't had much beer from them for a year or two, and they did a West Coast IPA that was fucking excellent.
Oh, nice. This is. It says it's got a blend of American and English ale yeast strains. I'm not going to drink all of these over the course of the podcast, you realise,
Oh.
but
Sorry, that's a part of the small print, Rufus.
oh well. Hang on, I've just got to tell my children they're putting themselves to bed tonight.
I love that stuff. Been drinking it for years. Drinking it for years. Drinking it for years. Drinking it for years. You know, I heard they recently decided to add more hops to it. Hops to it. You know, I heard they recently decided to add more hops to it. Hops to it. Chica, yeah,
You wanted to know about the Red Lions?
So I saw this on Would I Lie to You? And it turned out it was true. I was sat there going, I reckon that's true, because I've heard that Rufus likes beer. He follows the craft beer channel on Twitter. My girlfriend, my wife was like, no.
Both your girlfriend and your wife?
Yeah, both of them were like, no.
Not having it.
And then they found out about each other. It's a whole thing. Thanks, Rufus.
Would I lie to you indeed?
So yeah, tell me how you ended up on that mission.
There was, I think it's a bit more commonplace now that people's ideas for Edinburgh shows become a kind of a project, a whole thing. But the first guy to really do that was Dave Gorman with a show called Are You Dave Gorman?
He wanted to meet them all, didn't he?
That's right. He was trying to meet... Well, he basically constructed a version of... He didn't want his name to be super rare because that was snooty, but he also didn't want it to be so commonplace that it was common. So he came up with this formula that was he needed to be in this, what he called the golden cone of Gormanness. And it was how many Dave Gormans there were per square mile all over the world. And it was a pretty nifty idea for a show. That was actually his second. His first one, I don't remember what it was, but it was basically he wanted people's good ideas or make the world a better place. That was, I think, the gist of it. What could we do to make the world a better place? People's ideas, and then he would kind of test them out. So he'd done this idea, really, of setting yourself a pointless quest, but then really sticking to it and it being a thing. And me and my two best friends, who spent a lot of time in pubs and a lot of time drinking with each other, rather fancied that as being something that we might like to try ourselves. And maybe it was on QI or something like that, what was the... Oh, I think it was a question in Trivial Pursuit. What's the most common lion in the UK? And the answer is the Red Lion. Because, you know the history of why pubs are called the Red Lion?
No, hit me.
No.
So at one point, all pubs were called the Red Lion.
Really?
Yeah, it was the...
That is weird and
Well-
confusing.
It's like, we should call it a pub. Nah, I've got a better name.
Call it a Red Lion. Because... people in villages and towns who made their own beer would paint a red lion on the outside of their house to show like tribal allegiance to the king. And so it was basically saying, look, we're lawful, we are good folks, our beer is safe and you'll find safety here. We're not scumbags who are going to duff you up. So you painted a red line on the outside, and then anyone travelling would see the red line and go, oh, we could get a beer there and some comfort, some safety, security, and something to drink. So the symbol of the red lion, meaning that's basically a pub, was like right in the DNA. As such, that's why there were so many pubs all over the UK called the Red Lion. When I was 25, that would have been 2004. It was starting to be that a lot of those pubs was, it was the smoking ban, I think, was either just about coming in or there was a lot of talk of it coming in. A lot of the pubs had closed already and were reopening as wine bars or gastro pubs and that kind of thing. And when they did, they largely cast off the old names and now were, the Pig and Whistle, the Forger and Firkin, the whatever, just a sign that we've dropped that and we're moving forward with our own thing. And as four young men who had spent a lot of our lives by that point, 7 years, all built around being in a pub somewhere, we said, isn't it a shame that we're losing that part of our history or our inheritance? Wouldn't it be a swell thing to visit every pub in the country called the Red Lion? So again, this is sort of early-ish days of the internet. Now I think we'd be able to work it out a lot better. But we tried to establish how many pubs in the UK were actually called the Red Lion and how long it would take and how much money it would take to have a pint in all of them. And I think after a day or so, we realised it would almost have to be a lifetime's mission. You would either have to clear your year to visit them all, and also be prepared for some kind of liver surgery, because you would have to cover like 6 a day or whatever. So it'd be 6 pints a day every day for a year.
And had a weird conversation with the bank as well. Like, you want this money for what?
Exactly. So we just realised it couldn't be done. So then we said, well, how many pubs inside the M25 are called the Red Lion? And it turned out there were 20. I think there were meant to be 32. And obviously we couldn't drive. We were young men, so nobody had any money. It wasn't like, well, we'll Uber one to the next, or we'll take on a driver or any of that. So it just became this kind of stupid mission of planning out how you go one to the next on public transport and have a pint in each. And so we took some days off work. So it was going to be 5 days over my birthday to have a pint in each of these pubs. But it's worth remembering, me and my friends are fucking idiots. So it all started off with the best of intentions. But by the time we were in like the third pub, we were like, can you be bothered? No, I can't be bothered. Like, we got to get up and go to another pub. Well, we're fine in this one. This seems quite nice here. So
every pub crawl I've ever been on, it's like you do 2 or 3 and then you're like, should we just stay in this one? Like, we've got a seat.
Yeah.
And the music's not too loud.
Exactly. There's a pool table, you know.
Which area did you sort of start off in of London?
Well, like I said, we were based in Putney, and there was a Red Lion pub on Red Lion Lane in Richmond. So we were like, well, that's got to be the first, right? And then what was sort of beautiful and poetic about it was we got to Richmond, we got to Red Lion Lane, and that Red Lion was now a Thai restaurant called the White Elephant. So it was a kind of beautiful poetry to the start of our mission, just immediately falling flat on our faces.
So you had a massive man and...
Yeah, exactly. And we were sort of trying to document it and all sorts, but essentially none of us had the drive to really stick to it or make it into a project. So we did almost all of them. I think there were 4 we never quite made it to. Various adventures that happened on the way was my girlfriend at the time kicking the shit out of one of the guys I was with, because when he gets drunk, he likes to annoy people. And we're used to that, and we find it funny. She did not, and she literally just kicked the granny out of him.
Which isn't really in keeping with the Red Lion. That's where you're supposed to be safe.
This was outside a Red Lion, so it was fine. So there was that happened. One of the party had realised how many calories we're going to be taking on in beer, so had made himself a carrot korma in a massive like pressure cooker, which was just discount stir-in Uncle Ben's sauce to a 3-kilogram bag of carrots that he'd got from the market, and over the course of the week turned orange because he did not eat anything else apart from strong beer and carrot korma. He also, at some point, had convinced himself he'd given himself heart disease, but it turned out at some stage, at staggering into a bus stop, he had separated the muscle that held his chest muscle to his chest plate, and so without knowing it, had this sort of muscular spasm thing going on, which he was sure meant he was about to die imminently. So he was orange with heart disease. The other guy had the shit kicked out of him. I pretty much mooched through the whole thing in my usual laissez-faire fashion, but it did bring about probably one of the best times I've had with my dad, which was he had said, knowing that we were embarking on this, that there was a pub he used to drink in Westminster that was the Red Lion. And when we got to that one, he would like to join us to drink in the pub that he always drank in with his son on his birthday and his mates. And that was the absolute classic. We deliberately didn't put very many pubs in that day. I think just 3. And we sat down with my dad at lunchtime, then had a roast, and just got absolutely smash on it, and didn't leave there till closing. I think we even got kicked out in the end. With my dad just telling stories of how the world used to be back in the late 70s and early 80s, when business was essentially white men giving each other money whilst pissed. And I've never felt more jealous in my life. I mean, don't get me wrong, I believe that system should change, and I'm glad it's changing. But I also rather feel like we've probably lost some of the fun and swagger that the world had at that time. And maybe it was exclusionary, and as I say, plenty of good reasons for it to change. But I think I would have enjoyed the world more.
Is that what you're saying? We should bring business back to the pub?
Well, pubs and golf courses. You know, I don't play golf, but it seems to me there's a seriousness and an earnestness and a corporatization of everything now that I do find genuinely... I mean, I find a lot of the world profoundly troubling. I am profoundly troubled by the world, which is why I like beer as much as I do. It is a chemical absenting of being entirely anchored to what is real and what is really going on.
I feel like I need to point out at this point, and I have to do it with caution because a lot of people listen to this podcast now, there is an exception in the current Tier 2 rules in London where if it is a business meeting, you can go to a restaurant and meet with people outside of your bubble. So maybe, Rufus, maybe this is the time that business will come back to pubs and restaurants and golf courses.
Oh, man, that would be great. I'll tell you what, I got
businesses. Like that's what it's gonna start happening. Yeah, we were just having this brainstorm.
I've started 7 limited companies this week.
Yeah. The bad news is it's cost 36 grand at the accountant. The good news is I spent another 36 grand on beer. Hey. Yeah. I got really into disc golf. Have you guys know anything about disc golf?
No.
Is it frisbee but golf?
It's frisbee golf. Yeah.
How do you get really into that? Are there lots of games?
There are courses scattered around the country, but because I spent a lot of last year working in Stratford-upon-Avon, one of the best disc golf courses in the country is in Leamington Spa, about a 10-kilometre drive from Stratford-upon-Avon. And just being out in the lovely weather, throwing frisbees into baskets is joyful.
Do you have to wear a tyre like in golf?
No, that's it. It was. It's always been a kind of stoner hippie thing. Now it's become, a bit more serious and like this is a real sport, and they've kind of reinvented it for YouTubers. Like this is definitely a real sport. But when you see all the guys who were like previous pros, they're all wearing sandals. But it's all in the woods and outdoors and fresh air, so you can see why hippies might like it. But
maybe that's where business meetings will start happening now as well. You'll have guys from KPMG with their disc golf attire on.
Cannabis is one of the biggest growth industries in the world at the moment, now that America's started to decriminalise it. So, yeah, if you were going to have a business meeting about starting a cannabis brand anywhere, I reckon on the disc golf course is where that deal gets done.
I'm in for those press trips if anybody's listening.
Yeah.
I drove over to the Sonic Drive-In, ordered a jalapeno burger, washed it down with beer, I said, Stone Cold, why have one when you can have them both?
So I have a slight inside track to your life, Rufus, in that we have a friend in common.
Ah, lucky us.
Who is Richard Soames.
Oh, yeah, what a man.
So here's my oldest friend, my best friend. He was my best man a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, my stars!
And
You're why he couldn't play D&D.
So that is exactly where my question is going. I asked him, I was like, what should I ask Rufus? And you mentioned booze and disc golf as passions. You're also massively into D&D, and according to Rich Soames, your D&D character is very into booze as well.
That is right, yes. In fact, the hat I have got on while I'm recording this, if I hold that up to the thing there, where are we? Has got the D&D logo on it.
There you go. So what got you into D&D, and what's your character like, and where does booze fit in?
So, I mean, this is going to get quite deep. Essentially, quite often what's happened in my life is that I am steered towards liking things by finding out about the passions of people that I respect. So I didn't know anything about comic books, but I was super into the movies of Kevin Smith. The more I found out about Kevin Smith, the more I knew how much he liked comic books. I'd grown up really loving Spaced, and Simon Pegg had been on Alan Partridge. There was a sketch show on Channel 5 that he'd also been a part of, and I was like, I like this guy is cool. And when I found out about him, turns out, massively into comic books. So I was like, oh, these two people that I really rate both love comics. I need to read comics. So it has been with D&D, that in the last 5-6 years, the number of people that I'm really into their nerdery and the stuff that they make, turns out, have all played a lot of D&D. And so I kind of put feelers out to try and find a D&D game that I could join, only to resolutely be told repeatedly, it doesn't really work like that. I'm sorry, no. I'm like, but I just want to play. And they're like, no, there isn't a thing with D&D where like, oh, I just want to give it a go. That's not how this works. You basically have to know people who play and then be willing to commit years of your life to playing it.
Yeah,
and
I think for listeners, we need to rewind a bit. Well, me mainly. I know what it stands for, but other than that, I'm sort of like lost.
Oh, I'm coming to it. Don't worry. I'm just answering the question, how did I get into it? So the answer to that is that having desperately tried to find a game of D&D, my son, watching Stranger Things, where D&D, certainly in the first season, plays a big part, said to me, oh, Dad, I'd love to play Dungeons and Dragons. And then we were in a bookshop and they had released a Stranger Things Dungeons and Dragons set, which my boy went, oh, can we get that? We got it home, and I was trying to read it, trying to follow it, trying to work out how I could run this game for him and his mates to play Stranger Things D&D, and just found it to be completely beyond me. A couple of weeks later, I went to Marcus Brigstock's wedding and get sat next to this guy, Paul Foxcroft. And don't know Paul, but here we are at a wedding, and we're, chatting away, small talk and whatever. And he says that he runs this thing, Questing Time, which is a comedy live show of Dungeons and Dragons. At which point I just lose my mind, because now I have somebody within lickable distance, pre-pandemic, that I can, in my head at least, grab by the lapels and force him to let me play D&D. And he went, oh, yeah, well, I mean, I suppose so. I'm like, what is this? Why won't people let me play D&D?
Mad secret club.
This mad secret club. So I then arranged to pay him to come and run a D&D session for my son and his friends to play the Stranger Things set that we had bought, because I just couldn't make head nor tail of it. Which he did. And then I was like, I want to play too. So then at least I get to have played D&D once. Now, what D&D is essentially a story being told by somebody called the Dungeon Master. Really, they're the Game Master. In other role-playing games, they're just called the Game Master. But in D&D specifically, the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master is going to tell a story. They might be telling a story from a book published by Dungeons and Dragons. But they might want to tell their own story that they themselves have made up. But if you were a writer writing a story, you would be in charge of what all the characters in that story did. In Dungeons and Dragons, those characters are played by your players. So It might be your story, but how the characters are going to behave is not down to you. It's down to what the players want to happen in that story. There are then a bunch of rules, a bunch of seemingly almost impenetrable rules to do with, I want to run over there. Well, you're a bit too far away to get there this turn, so do you want to do something else? I'd like to hit that thing in the head with a hammer. Okay, but are you doing that one-handed or two-handed? Like, oh, God, it just feels impenetrable. But the reason that people won't let you just sit in for a game on the whole is that if you commit to a full campaign, that role that you're playing as a player, that character that you are making, grows and evolves and has a history and an emotional truth to them. And if you're an actor, as I have been privileged to earn a living doing for the last 8 years, all of your skills about who is this character, what motivates them, what are they likely to do in any given situation. At the point lockdown happened, I saw Paul Foxcroft tweet like, shit, that is literally everything I do to earn a living gone. And I tweeted him back saying, if you decide to do anything online, playing a regular online D&D campaign, I'm in. I just want in. I don't want to get paid. I'll promote it. I will do whatever it takes. I want to have the real experience of playing D&D. Now, my character that I ended up playing is a dwarf, and you've got to think of the dwarves here like Lord of the Rings dwarfs. Stocky. They might be short, but they're fucking tough as nails, really strong, beards, that kind of thing. He's a dwarf barbarian. So why would you be a barbarian if you're a dwarf? Because dwarven culture, and again, I'm talking like I've known this all my life. This is shit that I have learned and Googled and watched hours and hours of YouTube videos of over the last 9 months or whatever it's been. Dwarven culture is all about family, community, all of that. So why would you be a wild barbarian if you were a dwarf? So basically, he had something happen to him where he was eschewed from his home and basically took to the drink. And from that point onwards is just this semi-functional alcoholic drifting through the world, doesn't care about anyone or anything as long as the pub is within reaching distance. Now, at the point lockdown happened, I'd said to Paul I would play this game, and at the point I'd said that, I was like, well, lockdown, whatever, we'll get through it. And then the more it wore on, there was a point where my wife and I had to recognise that the difficulties we'd been having were unlikely to be surmountable when we made the decision to separate at the beginning of lockdown. And a lot of the things I feel about the world, like what is the point? I mean, we're recording this literally the day after the Tory government whipped its members to vote against feeding hungry children. The anger that I have within me about the state of the world and the state of this country is only ever millimetres from the surface. I spend my entire life being overwhelmed with anger and sadness about this shit show that we are all seemingly blindly just going along with. It is driving me mad. So this dwarf, right, is this nihilistic alcoholic who is basically trying to keep the world at bay. And then over the course of these adventures, over the course of lockdown, that feeling within me began to overtake me. But once a week, I would put on my headphones, put on a microphone, and pretend to be a dwarf with some funny people that I didn't know, Richard Soames being one of them, Bryony Redman, I didn't really know her. I think I'd heard Matt Heighton's name, but I couldn't tell you anything about him. And Paul Foxcroft, a guy I knew because I'd paid him to run a D&D game in my house with my kids. But, didn't know him. Over the last 9 months, my character has undergone a transformation from feeling angry and alone And I may yet start crying, very genuinely, right? And that's okay, because toxic masculinity must die and men can cry. It's fine. But my guy has gone from just being this fist of a person into somebody being forced to address why he feels like that. And the depth of therapy that has personally given me is incalculable. Like, I really truly believe that my experiences playing Dungeons and Dragons pulled me out of what was I mean, look, I'm still angry and I'm still on some level in despair, but it gave me a way of feeling like there might be some other way of doing this that I think, left to my own devices, I just would not have found. And it's probably terrible role play, or the signifier that I'm not very good at separating the line between character and myself, that it was so close to the bone. But in my head, it's like, it's not close to me at all, right? He's like a dwarf and he's got a big ginger beard, and, you know, lives in a kind of, and lives in a fantasy world. Like, it's not me at all. And there came a point about midway through the, not even midway, I don't think, but in the campaign, where my character got this tattoo, and this tattoo was incredibly meaningful to him without him knowing why. And so in between finishing the session where I got the tattoo and the next session, so a week went past, I had to work out why this tattoo was meaningful to him. And I looked into all the things this tattoo could mean. I then set about writing a song that he could sing to the others that explained why this tattoo meant so much. And the process of doing that just forced me to confront something truly uncomfortable right at the core of who I am as a person. Now, that is a game in which I pretend to be a dwarf. And yet, there is something about that experience that has enriched my life beyond all measure. And since that, I really truly think I personally have been able to start therapy. I went to the doctor, I got some antidepressants. I didn't start taking them because the doctor said these antidepressants might help, but therapy will help more. Take them if you need them. So I decided I would try to not need them and to concentrate on the therapy. But all of those choices came after playing D&D and the journey that my character went on through D&D. So when Richard tells you, ask him about D&D, his character is a raging alcoholic, it's like, yes, that is who my character was, and to an extent, that is who I have been. But that is not who my character now is, and that is who I am trying not to be. And when I say alcoholic, by the way, there is a propensity within me to absent myself from experiencing what is really going on around me. That is also true for alcoholics. My escape has not ever been alcohol. Alcohol and I get on just fine. I've never drunk and got angry. I've never drunk and it's changed my personality. I drink and everything is better. I am funnier. I am kinder. I am easier going. Me and booze get on just fine. But it is if you tell me I've got a day off, when I wake up, I'll think, oh, great, I'll get smash on it. Because I will feel better if I am drunk. And it's that I... Do you know what I mean? There's a difference between that kind of alcoholism where, like, shit, if I don't have a drink, I'm going to go mad. I need it to function. It's not that. I've never needed a drink to function. It's just that if I drink, the world is better. So that transition means that I'm not at a place now where I'm like, oh, God, I must not drink. I've got to kind of deal with all that stuff. Drink is just fine in somewhat moderation, but also actually to excess. What's What's the problem is the world, not the beer.
So I'm really interested to know. Well, first thing, like Rich didn't say you're an alcoholic. He said that your character has a story about.
Oh no, I wouldn't. I don't think I've said any of this to anybody in my D&D group. I'm telling you because I somewhat feel that people who would listen to a beer podcast may recognise some truth of that for themselves.
Does your character have a name?
Yeah, so he started off as the Rough Knight. So he was literally a knight, and the Rough Knight was just a funny thing to call him. Of course, over time that got shortened to Rough, and again a phenomenal moment of just absolutely fucking being so separated from what is obviously true going on around me. Is his name is Ruff, R-U-F-F. My name is Roof, R-U-F. You know, so it was like, it did feel after a while like there was something secret inside me trying desperately to like wave a flag and go, "Oi, dickhead!"
Well, that's where I was going to take that comment about Rich, because I feel like maybe he knew that there was. Well, I mean, more specifically, you said you were really into playing D&D without really understanding what it was. So did you already know that there was some therapy or at least escape there?
No.
That led you down that?
No, I mean, my whole job has been telling stories. And I realise, again, you know, I've done therapy, so some of these answers do sound quite therapized or, you know, therapeutically led. But yeah, my whole life is sort of obsessed with stories. It was all I ever wanted to do. From 3 till 19 was be an actor. Ran out of ways of which I thought I could bring that about, so stopped. Then did some writing. That was stories, but, you know, not on any great level. And then acting became a thing I could do after I'd done stand-up, which was telling stories on the whole. So, yeah, my obsession is with stories, and D&D always... I mean, you know, I'd seen D&D referenced in all sorts of things I'd read and loved and enjoyed, and that was why I wanted to play it so much. But, yeah, it was definitely the interest in, what's this game where you do stories, more than it was, I really want to play a, you know, halfling cleric with a hit point of 16 because if I get a shield and then I can do this other thing. I just didn't really know very much about it. And
does more comedy make sense to you now? That of like people that you like that were into D&D, does their comedy make more sense now because you know what they're talking about, or is it like reference sort of incognito a little bit at all?
I think because it is quite a hard thing to get into. You know, you need to find a dungeon master who's running a game, who's happy to have you there and happy to hold your hand through the first few sessions. Or, you know, be willing to get together with a group of people and commit to learning it together. And, you know, one person's going to learn to be the DM. The problem is, if you're being DM'd by somebody who's never done it before and doesn't really know the game, it just becomes incredibly slow going because you're all the time referencing, can you do that? Can you do this? You know, it's just like looking up rules the entire time. So an experienced DM fundamentally changes how fun that game is. So I think because of that, people who have played D&D and you know, look, other role-playing games are available. It just happens to be D&D in my case. But I think people who've played that, there is a sense of knowing how meaningful and how much it matters to them that isn't necessarily something you want to justify to a bunch of other people or explain to a bunch of other people. Because to an extent, you either get it and you were one of the kids trying to get out of PE to sit in the library and roll dice, or you weren't. And if you weren't, me explaining to you why this is fucking unbelievably great isn't going to make you think it's unbelievably great. It's just going to be a thing where you look at me and think, oh, nerd. So I think there is a propensity... I don't know how many times I've used the word propensity. Probably 1,000. But there is a propensity to, I think, love D&D and to share it with other people who love D&D, but to not necessarily evangelise about it. certainly in America, it got in like the 80s, it got linked up with like this is satanic, and it's there was a big Christian backlash against D&D. Which honestly, when you've played it, is fucking hilarious. it's so far away from being anything even remotely like that. But yeah, I think it's a well-known technique in therapy to get people to put their problems in the third person or think about it objectively. Is like, well, what would you say to somebody in your situation? And I think that thing of D&D was like, well, I'm not me, I'm this character, so what would that character do? How does that character feel? And absolutely subconsciously, it was me trying to, some internal self trying to fight its way from beneath my own bullshit.
So you wanted to tell a story and didn't quite realise it was your story that was going to be told.
Yeah, that is absolutely right. I'll tell you this briefly as well. So I wrote this song. Originally it was going to be a poem, right? Like an ode, like a war ode. All of our history at one point was a verbal history, and that's how we have those histories. So that would be true for Ruff as well, to be able to explain why this hammer tattoo mattered to him. And I started off writing it as that, and as I wrote it, I thought, actually, this feels more like lyrics than a poem. And I'm a big, big fan of a folk singer called John Smith. And I urge all listeners to immediately, if you've ever liked any kind of folk music or just good music, singer-songwriter music, get on your Spotify, get on your Apple Music, get on whatever you've got, and treat yourself to some John Smith. An amazing musician, a phenomenal guitarist, a brilliant songwriter, and with a voice that will, could melt steel. Phenomenal. And a little while ago, I went to a very intimate gig of his and hung out with him a bit afterwards, and we ended up catching a train and exchanged numbers, and we text each other, and as is the way in the modern world, have spent no short amount of time promising one another we'll get together for a beer whilst the world moves on, and we never do that. But I messaged him and went, listen, I'm writing this thing and I think it should be a song, but I don't know how to write a song. I don't suppose, because it's the pandemic and nothing's happening, you've got any time, have you? And he messaged me back saying, no, I'm really sorry, I don't have any time at all. I'm literally prepping to record my album in the studio. And that's all being done under COVID restrictions or whatever, but I've just got to have like everything ready to go. So I don't have any time. However, send it over, and if I get 5 minutes, I'll strum something out. But like, I am too busy really. And I was like, oh mate, look, don't worry about it. I won't even send it. And he's like, no, send it. You never know. I might read it. Something might catch. Like, I'll work something out. I sent it over. 3 days later, in my inbox, arrived a full production song with sound effects, multi-tracking. There's a string section, kicks in at one point. And it is the most remarkable, magical, one of the most meaningful things I've ever accomplished in my life. And my debt to John is huge, but none of that would have happened had it not been for the D&D game. And it is about a magic hammer. That song is about a magic hammer. The hammer itself was made by dwarves to protect dwarves, and was used by a vampire to kill the dwarves that made it. And so this dwarf lives with, this hammer, this sentient hammer, lives with this profound regret. And my character, who has felt himself pushed away from his community of dwarves and all of the bullshit and the machinations and the corporate power that led to that happening, he lives with the profound regret and the resentment of all of that. So to the character, you understand, the experience of the hammer felt very meaningful. And what I don't realise all the time I'm fucking writing it, because I'm an idiot, is, oh, that is exactly how I feel about the world. So, John Smith wrote a song about a magic hammer that is a song about me feeling upset and angry about existing.
Your dungeon master's not aware of the therapy he's giving to you at this point. He must have to feel some pressure.
I think if you were of a mind, you could, when this is finished recording, now get on to Richard and record him, right? And ask him to what extent was everybody else brutally aware, like painfully aware, that I was trying to process my own, existential / midlife crisis.
Yeah, we invited him because we knew he needed it.
Exactly. I mean, I wouldn't put it past all of them to have been secretly messaging like, shit, we've really got to look after Rufus because he's, without this, he's got nothing. So, yeah, they may have been all too aware.
How long actually does a game of Dungeons and Dragons last?
Well, it can be years.
And when you die, you're out, right?
Well, somewhat. Basically, in Dungeons and Dragons, you can be knocked unconscious, you can be killed, but because people have magical powers, they can bring you back and revive you and what have you. So even if you die, you're not necessarily dead. However, if things go really badly wrong, sometimes you are dead and your character has died and that's it, that character's done. Even then, by the way, if the other people in your party decide to then go and find a high priest of some, necromantic cult, they can pay, vast sums to try and bring that, and then that becomes a whole quest in and of itself. But yeah, people in D&D, you absolutely can die. There is one of the party that we play with is playing this sort of like cheeky little scamp called Fill in Blanks, played by Matt Heighton. And because we're a comedy D&D game as opposed to like pure serious tactic, strategy, all of that, essentially anytime there is a situation of like, do not press button, you know for a fact that Fill-in's running right up to it like, oh, what does this do? Bang. So as a result, he's permanently been, scorched, burnt, knifed, killed, thrown off cliffs, all sorts. And seems to just about get through it. Not exactly unscathed, but just about get through it. We ended up in our adventure in hell. And we were trying to battle our way out of hell in order to find a portal to return home. And during a fight, which was basically Mad Max meets Super Mario, very much Paul's design. He had this idea of like we'd all be on these cars racing through the desert like Fury Road. But then he started throwing in loads of Mario Kart references as well. It was honestly one of the best evenings of my life. It was so fun. But Fill-in, in this battle, Fill-in's good at all sorts of things, but fighting isn't necessarily his strongest strong suit. Fill-in the middle of it, hang on, I'm going to go back one step. Fill-in has this wild magic. So when he does something magical, something else magical may or may not happen. And that's called wild magic. So a random thing will occur. Sometimes his hair's suddenly grown 2 foot long. Sometimes he's grown 6 inches taller. There's all these like weird things that can happen if he does magic. So we're doing this fight. We're jumping across some cars and like smashing monsters and getting hit and jumping onto the next car and smashing more monsters. And everyone's taking a real beating. And it looks like actually there's a chance as a party we are not going to get through this. Fill-in casts a spell. And Paul goes, okay, I'm just going to... Oh, right. And we're like, oh, no. Whenever Paul makes that noise, it largely means something terrible is about to happen. Anyway, the fight continues. And 3 rounds later, Fill-in gets hit by this monster. Or, no, had been grabbed by a monster. And this monster basically grabs Fill-in and rips him in half. Well, we've seen Fill-in die before. But if you're ripped in half, we can't put you back together. You know, that's not what this magic can do. Like, we have witnessed our cheeky little mate literally die properly, full on, irrevocably die. And the 4 funny players of our funny game of D&D literally go stone quiet. And Paul, the dungeon master, who, bear in mind, we've got people watching us play this. It's sort of meant to be a fun, entertaining stream. Is like, okay, so the two halves of Philin get thrown to the ground by this monster. What do you want to do? Rufus, it's your turn. I'm like, sorry. And it's just very clear that we are absolutely mortified. And we play the next 20 minutes of the game with all of us just like limping in, like, I'll hit him with my hammer, both-handed. Yeah. And we're all, and we've got people watching it and commenting on Twitch at the same time, so the chat is just like, what the fuck? And then the chat stops moving and people are like, I'm crying here. Everyone's moved. So it ends up, I think I hit some monster, the monster dies, and now we're left with the grief of our friend dying. And Paul says, at which point there is a blinding flash of light. Matt, roll a dice. And Matt's like, what? Because Matt thinks he's dead. And he's like, roll a 6-sided dice. What number did you get? 4. Okay. Matt, pick a colour out of blue, silver, red or green. Matt's like, red. He's like, okay. There's a blinding flash of light. Matt, look at your phone. And Paul is privately WhatsApping Matt. He's like, Matt, look at your phone. He's like, right, there's a blinding flash of light. And from out of that white light steps a 7-foot-tall, half-man, half-dragon, which opens its mouth and says, and Matt says, all right, guys, I think I dropped off for a minute there. And that wild magic thing that he had rolled earlier in the turn, the rule was, if you die any time in the next 3 turns, you are reincarnated as a different race and a different thing, but you are the same character. And I shit you not, the 120 people watching it, the 4 people playing it, all went, yes! Yeah! We went fucking mad. It was one of the most genuinely heartfelt, joyful things. I mean, 2020, right? Everything's awful. The world's terrible. We're run by cunts. But that moment of, oh my God, our friend died, to this weird thing that could have been any one of a million things actually turned out to be that none of us foresaw or could have predicted, that he was okay and he came back. And now he went from being this little Bilbo Baggins-y kind of figure. He's now this 7.5 foot tall red fire breathing dragon, but still the same idiot.
Oh, I think it's got a yeast infection. Yeast infection.
So that was Sweary Rufus Hound. I think that's one of our best ever episodes, really, and nothing to do with us, really. It was just that Rufus is such a great storyteller and so refreshingly honest and open about stuff that's usually pretty tough to talk about. And I think having people like him really open up is really important, so that everyone else can go like, it's okay to talk about these things.
Yeah, it was really amazing just hearing how much something like that could help him. And he didn't enter into it wanting to get that out of it either, which I really liked. He was just really intrigued, and as he spoke about a lot of people that influenced him were into this game, and he was like, what is it? How can I understand this better? And then fast forward 6 months and he is fully indoctrinated into the ways of Dungeons and Dragons. So much so that he had a pin on his hat.
He did. Yeah, he showed us. It reminded me of my journey into beer. Like lots of people who I really liked were drinking great beer, and that's kind of how I started getting really interested in it, along with actually experiencing it myself. It's obviously much easier to get into craft beer than it is into a group doing Dungeons and Dragons. Apparently, it's a very exclusive club. But yeah, these sort of obsessions and these really positive escapisms are really important in times like this. And for me, in a positive way, if you can control it and if you understand it and if you're open to the idea that it could be a negative thing, alcohol, craft beer, artisan alcohols can be a really wonderful escape. It brings people together, whether it's on Zoom or in person. And it is an escapism for me, sitting down just with either just like, a really crisp lager that I drink and enjoy with friends, or whether it's just dissecting a lambic I've been aging for a couple of years on my own, listening to podcasts and stuff. Like, alcohol's a really important escapism for me, and I think Rufus has found a way to combine alcoholism and Dungeons and Dragons. So he is well out of himself for a couple of hours every week, which I kind of envy, and I really want to play Dungeons and Dragons now.
Yeah,
I could ask my friend Rich, but I think, I WhatsApped him about it and he didn't reply. So I think he's like, oh God, not another one.
Not Johnny. Ugh.
Yeah.
But I think alcohol's often seen as the obvious form of escapism, and obviously it can have quite negative connotation as well, and the risks and dangers associated with it. So it's nice to hear of more positive and risk-free. Maybe Dungeons and Dragons isn't quite risk-free because it might take up so much of your time, that relationship, right? By the sounds of things. But it was a really positive outlet for him, and it's really nice to hear things other than tannin beers that people are enjoying. What else do you use, Johnny, that's positive, a positive form of escapism for you?
Exercise is the other one that I use for escapism. I go for a run or a cycle or a long walk every single day. That just helps me reset. So yeah, running with music is really cathartic for me, and it means I run at a much faster pace and a much shorter distance than is probably actually helping my cardio. But I use it for emotional health rather than physical.
Yeah, definitely. And we should have said, actually, you can watch Rufus playing his Dungeons and Dragons. It's called Questing Time through Twitch, which we can link in the bio.
I'll put a link below, and you can see the joy that they're getting from it. Like, the fact that they get paid a little bit of money to do this is the ultimate joy, and how I feel about Craft Beer Channel most weeks. Weeks like the week I've had this week with pumpkin beer was a bit stressful, but mostly, to be paid to have that escapism and that joy is a privileged place to be. Talking of privilege, we also did talk quite a lot about the politics of things. Initially, when we approached Rufus, we were going to talk about comedy more generally, but he's been more of an actor for the last sort of decade or so. So we decided, he decided as well, that maybe he wasn't the best person for comedy. But it has had the lockdown and the way that the government at the moment have been giving out its support has been brutal to the comedy industry and the hospitality industry. So all the political moments there, we completely stand with Rufus in saying that, people that desperately need help, and we're not just talking about businesses, we're talking about people here, are really, really struggling right now. So, big shout out to his local bottle shop, Noble and Green.
Yeah, it's really nice to hear him chatting about Noble Green Wines. It's been a customer of mine for many, many years, and they're a great bunch of people that have really pioneered craft beer down in that sort of area of southwest London. So if you live around there, go buy some beer off them, chat with Peter, and support your local, because they need it now more than ever, really, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there is this idea that bottle shops have done pretty well out of this, and that's true in fits and spurts, but it's not true overall. And they've also had to work incredibly hard for that very small bump in profits that some of them have got. So don't let this narrative that takeaway alcohol is flying. It's really not. And also remember that pubs are absolutely decimated by this, whether you're in lockdown or not. So please support your local pub if you can, safely. Yeah, so like we said at the start of the podcast, if you've been if you've struggled like Rufus has perhaps lately, there's some links below. But honestly, the best way to cheer you up I can think of is watching Questing Time. Don't watch Question Time. that will depress you further. Questing Time on Twitch is a lot of fun. And Rich Soames, who is my best friend in the world, and was actually on this podcast for our Christmas episode where we talked about Christmas movies, is also there being him. So watch out for that and check out our Christmas episode. The final thing we'll plug is our coronavirus episode, in which we talked about the plight of the hospitality industry, restaurants, pubs, and breweries. So do listen to that as well. There's a link in the description box below to that. And otherwise, that was probably our biggest celebrity, right? Our biggest catch.
Well, have we had any sort of near celebrities before?
I don't know. It depends. Depends if you consider Evan of Colonel a celebrity.
Well, yeah. Which in the beer, most listeners to this podcast will think he is a celebrity. So let's say he's level pegging.
Yeah. So if there's anybody that you think we should chat to, anybody you know with a deep passion for something really specific that could be linked to beer, do let us know, because we're really open to getting other people on, and we will get a comedian in as soon as we can, because I think that's a really important story to tell as well.
Or if you know any celebrities, then Rufus or Evan that listen to the podcast, let us know.
do send us a message. Well, all the best, guys. Stay safe. And remember to subscribe to the podcast and to the Craft Beer channel. The Bubble Podcast is brought to you by the nerds behind YouTube's Craft Beer channel. Head to youtube.com/the Craft Beer channel to watch this week's video and over 400 more exciting episodes. If you love what we do, please do subscribe and even join our Patreon at patreon.com/craftbeerchannel. Love and beer.